Hello, and thank you so much for joining us on the fifth episode of the Books to Last podcast. This week, we're joined by River Reads, and we had a wonderful time talking about some really excellent and meaningful stories. I had such a great time during this discussion, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, River, and welcome to the Books to Last podcast. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks for having me.
Are you reading anything at the moment, and are you enjoying it?
I am. I picked up yesterday and started reading last night A Man Called O, which is by Frederick Bachman.
I've heard of it.
I've read the first three chapters, and then I had to go to sleep because it was 3 a.m. But it is... I actually thought about binging it last night so I could succinctly say, oh, it's in my list of 5 books. Because it's actually that good. I'm like, oh, I can relate to this character and I can tell that it's leading somewhere deep, which deep stories speak to me a lot. And so, yeah, it's fantastic. Definitely recommend it.
I remember it was on, I got recommended to me years ago, and it did make it onto my TBR list. And I remember, I think the title just really sort of caught my attention because it's really unique. Oh, how exciting. So maybe one day if we ever do a revisited episode in the future, Man Called Ove could possibly make an appearance.
Yeah.
Excellent. I got in trouble the weekend for I stayed up until about 2:00 in the morning reading, and I regretted it the next day quite a bit. Okay, so for listeners who don't know, the Books to Last podcast is the podcast that challenges book lovers from all over the world to pick the only 5 books they can take with them to a mystery location where they're going to be cast away forever. Basically, the 5 books that they can't possibly live without and could read over and over again and just continue to love. So as part of this, our esteemed guest can also pick the location they're going to be cast away to. We've had very remote glens in Scotland. We've had cabins in forests that are also next to beaches and mountains, and we've had space. So really, the world is quite literally your oyster. Where would you like to go?
So I haven't put much thought into the location, but my brain has been so poisoned by the last year that my brain went, you're trapped in an apartment during lockdown. I thought of another option, but the other option spoils one of the books, so I might mention it when I talk about that book.
Okay, excellent. To be fair, that's very fitting. I had my reading had trailed off greatly before the pandemic started, and I was kind of gifted some more time to read by being able to stay at home. But that's very fitting. To be honest, first instinct tends to be the best way to go. It's probably the one part that I don't give my guests any pre-warning about, because it's kind of nice to see what spur of the moment brings.
It's fun, yeah.
Excellent. So what 5 books are you taking? Well, what's the first of your 5 books, in no particular order, are you taking to your lockdown apartment?
No particular order. Okay, so the first one is a book that means a lot to me because I don't tend to like or enjoy any kind of sci-fi or fantasy. That's for both books and movies or anything like that, barring the obvious Star Wars, which I feel like is so applicable just to real life that it's barely sci-fi at this point. And a few years ago, along came The Martian, which for me, it's a story about someone who's trapped on Mars, right? And I feel like it so effectively communicated how the main character would have been feeling when they were trapped on Mars. And I feel like when things can effectively communicate sort of inner feelings in such a succinct way, that really draws me into a book. And I think also it managed to do the journal entry thing, and I didn't hate it because normally I don't like that. Like when a book shows you like, oh, the character's Facebook posts or something, I'm like, I don't
I'm
really like
exactly the
this.
same. I'm not a journal entry, a story written in
Yeah,
letters kind of person.
that's a little too far on the tell side of show don't tell.
Mm,
So I'm like, yeah, but I think the journal entries that is shown in The Martian are done very well
yeah.
to sort of show the character's feelings as well.
I think the thing that always catches me with journal entries and letters and that sort of thing is it almost always it starts as a letter or journal entry, and it always transitions into prose. And my head is just reading it saying no one writes in their journal like this.
No,
So that's just always mine. That's the thing that always trips me up. But that's really interesting because I mean I haven't read The Martian. Am I right in thinking it's a one character, low on dialogue interactions kind of book?
yes. So I'm not sure if you've seen the movie. That's okay.
Sorry.
So it's set into basically two areas. One is the main character who's trapped on Mars
Mm-hmm.
after his team had to leave for like an emergency reason, basically. And the other half of the story is the team on Earth in Houston, I guess. I'm
Probably.
not
That
sure.
sounds right.
Probably. Basically doing damage control of the fact that they left one of their astronauts on Mars.
Yeah. It's not good
But
PR.
no, it's bad. By and large, it is more than not around the one character.
Mm-hmm.
And his react. It's basically a desert island story, but in space. But I think it worked really well.
I mean, it sounds really interesting because I mean, it's always really impressive when authors can make a book that is mainly about just one character very interesting, because I mean, there are a lot of people who don't enjoy books with just the one character and very little dialogue. I mean, if it's well written, I tend to be able to enjoy both. But that sounds really, really interesting. Have you seen the film? Do you find that it's a good translation?
I think the film's a great translation. One of the things I look for in a film though is like a good cast, and so it's got Matt Damon and a few other sort of actors that I quite enjoy. And I'm like, I'm too biased against the actors to not enjoy it.
It's always
It was
good when
done
that
very well.
happens.
Yeah, it was done very well.
I always find it really disappointing. Like, I mean, especially with books that you love, I always get the casting's always like the key point for me, because I always feel that even if the film hasn't been written maybe amazingly well, really good actors can sort of bring it back a little. Ideally, you want both, but it's
Yes.
yeah, but that's really, really good that it's translated well, because I know, I mean, a lot of people have favorite books that they just won't go near the on-screen adaptations with a 5-foot barge pole, because they've not been done very well. So that's really, really great.
I could give examples, but yeah.
Well, so you're not a big fan of sci-fi and fantasy. Does that mean that this is the sort of only sci-fi novel that we can expect to get from your list?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
I do have a couple of graphic novels, which some people categorize those stories as sci-fi or fantasy. I'm like, maybe, I don't know. Depends on your perspective.
Yeah, I think
it's a grey area.
I think graphic novels are kind of sort of a genre in of themselves, and then they have their own subgenres, because I think it translates so differently. Because I think most of, especially with fantasy, because there's different facets of like, high fantasy, urban fantasy, all that sort of thing. A lot of that is in the writing, and because that's not necessarily the focal point of a graphic novel, I think it kind of needs to be categorized just differently. Okay, excellent. So The Martian, and who writes The Martian, just for my benefit and any reader?
Andy Weir.
Andy Weir. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very good. So what is your second book joining The Martian?
So I've got 2 graphic novels on here. And the first one is, and I made sure to stick to the series rule.
Yeah.
So they're only standalone books. The first graphic novel is God Country by Donny Cates.
Oh, right. I don't think I've heard of that one. What's that about?
So basically, a man and his family, so a man and his wife and son, are called to his elderly father's home. The elderly father has basically like dementia and is just having an episode. And it's showing the struggle of sort of this, this man sort of coming to terms with sort of not being able to communicate with his elderly father. And then his elderly father, I believe I'm just giving the blurb, so I don't think I'm spoiling anything, but the elderly father finds basically, like, if you've seen Thor, basically like the equivalent of the hammer, and is imbued with these godlike powers, and is able to communicate with his family and things like that. Eventually, the actual gods that own the hammer come to reclaim it, and sort of an adventure continues. Basically, it's Donny Cates seems to have gone through a lot in his life, and he really imbues what it's like to be human into his stories. Because he writes a lot of fantastic stories. He has written Thor and a few other Marvel sort of comics that are like larger than life, but they all have these sort of human elements that you can really sort of relate, and you really feel something, and you're like, it makes you think about what it's like to be a human in the world today, and having such complicated relationships.
That's really important, especially, I mean, it's impressive that someone's able to do that with, I mean, Marvel superheroes, that kind of character. It's very easy to sort of some people do read it for pure escapism, and that's fine, but being able to relate to these characters that are so by design unrelatable, because then they're nothing like what we know, is a really impressive trait. And I mean, dementia is a really difficult subject to sort of broach. It's something that a lot of writers could try, and handling something that delicate is really important, and they're often really heartbreaking stories, just because it's it's a really horrible thing to just contemplate. I know, I couldn't imagine. It sound does he you said it's a graphic novel, does he do the art as well?
He doesn't. I believe the art is done by Jeff Shaw. I can double check it if we are happy for that to happen.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I
agree that credit where credit's due is important. So,
well, I just think, because I often find it's just interesting, especially with stories with such deep sort of emotional ties, to see how that's interpreted through the art. And they often, I mean, it's kind of one of the things that I really enjoy about graphic novels, is that you get the story and the writing, but you get a visual book as well. And they both sort of tie into each other quite well. I just thought interesting.
Absolutely. It is Jeff Shaw, who does a lot of work with Donny Cates, does communicate the feelings of the story very well. Absolutely.
Excellent. So is it quite, I mean, where is it on sort of length of graphic novels? Because I know some can be incredibly long and some quite short.
That's fair. It's only 6 issues, so it's maybe 300 pages at most.
I mean, fairly fairly decent length for I know on a previous list we tend to get well, and I have yet to do my list, but we get a lot of people trying to get the sort of most value out of as many pages as they can possibly cram into their 5 books as possible. But I think with the graphic novels, you kind of, in the same way that if you revisit 800-page novel and pick up new things every time when you've got that kind of layer. And also because there's so much less sort of background prose, I suppose it can mean something to you at different times, and rereading can uncover new things.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
So we have The Martian, sci-fi.
Yep.
Was it God's Own Country?
God Country.
God Country, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
That's fine. And what is your third book?
My third book is the other graphic novel. So I am unapologetically a Spider-Man fan. I
love Spider-Man so much.
I have a bookshelf behind me, and like half the bookshelf is just Spider-Man comics. I tried to think of a loophole because that is by and large a series and relies on other books to inform whatever book I would have chosen.
You are allowed a series. You're allowed books from a series, just not the entire series.
I know, but it was more fun than this way. Because I found if I was like, the first book in the series, that's too easy.
Yeah.
I wanted to make it more fun. I chose Spider-Man Life Story, which came out, I think, 2019.
Right.
The premise of Spider-Man Life Story is so in comics, right? So like Spider-Man's been 20 years old for about 60 years. And so the premise of Spider-Man Life Story is what if he aged? So like it's a 6-issue series. And each issue is another decade. And so like each issue he's older, he has to develop, a better suit to help him sort of not break his bones or anything when he's fighting these larger than life characters and things like that. It translates things like his marriage to Mary Jane quite well. And for anyone who's at all aware of the character, I think it's a great encapsulation of what has happened in Spider-Man's life over the last 60, 70 years.
Yeah, it's always really interesting when they try to grapple with, an aging superhero, because it's kind of like, in the same way, I don't know, The Simpsons is the one that's jumping to mind. The characters stay the same age for the majority of their existence. And whilst that sort of helps you to continue telling the stories that everyone loves, it also bars you from a lot of stories that, you wouldn't, that you don't get if you don't go through those big landmark times. I don't know that I've actually heard of that one, but I'm really interested because I am a big fan of Spider-Man myself as well.
Yes.
Begrudgingly, oddly, because I had a friend when I was very young who adored Spider-Man, but they always tried to sell me on it, but their mistake was trying to sell me on Spider-Man as a character with the Amazing Spider-Man films, which if anyone enjoys them, that's completely fine, but they were not the way to sell Spider-Man to me. No, not particularly, but I've since sort of revisited the character and sort of in film and in books and that sort of thing, and he very endearing character, just the sort of origin story, where he comes from, and I really enjoy is it Peter Parker Spider-Man, I'm assuming?
Yes although because it tackles every decade, towards the end you do have, I don't think it's a spoiler, Miles Morales, who everyone knows came out in the last 10 years. And so towards the end, you've got Miles pops up. I'm like, oh, that's great.
That's excellent.
You didn't ignore that. That's awesome.
Miles is also wonderful. All of the Spider-Men and women are wonderful.
Absolutely.
There's all of the Spider people. That's really, really, who writes and does the art for that one?
So it's written by Chip Zdarsky. He's done a lot of work for Marvel, and it's drawn by Mark Bagley, who has been drawing Spider-Man since the 80s. He did a lot of the Mark Bagley did a lot of the art for sort of like the Clone Saga era stuff, and then he did the art for most of Ultimate Spider-Man, and he's even doing issues today. If you pick up Amazing Spider-Man, probably this week, it'll have his artwork. So,
that's really
dude loves his
great.
job, I guess.
Well, I mean, when you've got a job that cool, I think I'd never retire as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. That sounds like a really interesting one. I also think Spider-Man, to be fair, I've got a lot of younger cousins and that sort of thing, and I'm incessantly that person in the family who buys all of the children books for birthdays and Christmas, whether they want books or not. That's what they get. And I'm always on the hunt for things to get. And one of my cousins in particular is a big fan of sort of graphic novels and manga and that sort of thing. So he is probably going to get a copy of that for his birthday this year.
Yeah, it's so good.
Excellent. Right. So we have your 2 graphic novels and your sci-fi pick.
Yep.
What will be joining them in your lockdown apartment, which is going to have access to all of the best takeaway outlets because cooking is difficult in lockdown?
Uber Eats, basically.
Uber Eats. It's going to... Depending on where you, I mean, our Uber Eats has very sort of limited choices because of how spread out my city is. We apparently, a 15-minute drive is too long to deliver food.
That is, well, that's rough. I'm sorry.
Inconsiderate. It's inconsiderate of them.
I cannot imagine COVID without Uber Eats. I'm sorry.
We have some, but some of the restaurants in my area are inconsiderate and think that 15 minutes is too far. But anyway,
Yes,
enough of my criticism of Uber Eats using restaurants. What is your 4th choice joining your book so far?
So the 4th book, I chose... think which order I want to do this in. Okay, so I had a hard time picking the book, so this one just scraped in. But it's a recent read of mine. I felt it applicable for me to pick a Neil Gaiman. I quite enjoy the game. He's great. Norse mythology. It's basically a...
Sorry, I'm looking at it on my shelf. It's
fantastic. It's basically a retelling of most of the great mythological Norse stories that we all know. And I think if I was stuck anywhere, I could reread that like crazy. And especially, not that I'll have this on my desert island COVID apartment, but they've been doing a graphic novel adaptation of the book recently. And it's just as good, if not better, just because the art sort of adds a lot to it. It's fantastic. But yeah, Norse mythology. I didn't know much about Thor until, I don't know if you can count the Marvel movies, but like...
Sort of.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So I picked up this book and I was like, let's just learn a bit about it, And it was so great because I think I love how, pulling into the escapism element of reading, I love how fun and ridiculous most of the stories are. My favorite story is when Thor cross-dresses to help, I believe, his sister not get married. And so I think Thor winds up getting married in a, what I'm guessing is an elegant dress. It's a fantastic story.
They are stories that really Marvel have left untapped in their I mean, the things they could have got Chris Hemsworth to do. I mean, the mind boggles. It really does. But yeah, it's Norse mythology is a really interesting one. So I do have I didn't know a great deal about Norse mythology because I always sort of lean towards Greek mythology, mainly because I'm a big fan of Rick Riordan's books, sort of the Percy Jackson series, which for all of their, since they are sort of modernized and brought to a younger audience, they are still, in their purest forms, the actual stories. And then recently rereading actually branched out into Norse mythology. And I remember thinking, I mean,
Oh,
the Greek
cool.
yeah, it's a series called Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard. There's 3 of them.
Ooh.
They're really, really good. I really, really love everything that he writes, but they in particular were one of my favorite recent additions to the series. But I thought that Greek mythology was kind of wild and insane, and it can't possibly get any crazier than that. And Norse mythology really gives it a run for its money. It's some of the stuff that it's just really. I, it's entertaining. It's pure entertainment in like the very best way. But yeah, Neil Gaiman is. I mean, it's interesting he's doing a graphic novel because I know he sort of he has sort of ties into graphic novels with histories in that. And I just think if I was going to pick any sort of contemporary authors to rewrite and retell the greatest stories and mythologies of all time, I don't think I could probably pick anyone better than Neil Gaiman for Norse mythology. And I mean, Stephen
Absolutely.
Fry is doing a fantastic job of the Greek mythology as well. So I think it's really, really it's a really good choice. Also, the book is really, really pretty. It's got a nice cover and
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
of course. And I think that, I mean, they're clearly timeless. They've lasted a great deal of time as stories. So I can imagine
Yeah.
them being very entertaining rereads during, this endless lockdown, which really doesn't sound as speaking as someone
Well,
from the UK, it doesn't sound as far-fetched as I would wish.
I mean, I'm in Sydney, so I haven't been locked down since like about a year ago. So I've just been
I'm
living
so
my life. I'm sorry to
jealous.
say
I'm
that.
so jealous. We received news. We received word from the great window in the wall that we will possibly, maybe, if we're all very well behaved, be allowed to resume normal life in June of this year, which means it will have been about 18 months off and on.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I honestly, I'm kind of used to it. It kind of, I mean, it's awful because the loss of life is just horrendous. But from a sort of personal perspective, my life path kind of only changed in that I just had to start working from home essentially because my job can be done remotely. So I essentially transitioned from doing a 3-hour round trip commute every day to working from home to do my job. And
Yeah.
yeah, because it's been so long, this has actually become the new normal that everyone said it would. And yeah, I feel like it's gonna be a whole other thing trying to get back to it again. But yeah, it's great. I've gotten lots of reading done, so there's
Yeah.
that, and
There's a lot of time for that. Yeah.
there's apparently light at the end of the tunnel. So there is there is that. We've been promised it's an irreversible process from our esteemed leader. So it's not a political podcast. I don't need to talk about
Yeah.
anything else.
I was going to avoid talking about your esteemed leader.
I have to call him that sarcastically because anything else that I might refer to him as, I don't think it's suitable for sharing on the internet. So anyway, reading,
Books are great.
excellent. Those great, yeah, great. So Norse mythology is really a great one. Has it kind of whet your appetite for going into reading any other mythologies? Is it maybe piqued a new interest?
It's made me consider it. And I think the most I've considered other mythologies is when I've seen Stephen Fry's book in the shops. I'll be like, I should get that one day.
Well, he's on 3
I
now, I think.
really.
Yeah, so he did Mythos, Heroes, and then he's just done Troy. So I mean, I
I think
think
I've seen Troy. I've seen Troy in the shops.
Troy is the
Yeah.
most recent one, so that's likely, I think. But Mythos and Heroes, the great thing about Stephen Fry is he voices all of his own audiobooks. So, and
Oh, great.
he's just great at audiobooks. So, recommend those if you want an alternative way of thinking. I like audiobooks because they kind of feel like podcasts. They don't feel necessarily a lot like reading. So, I
They are very good. Neil Gaiman doing the voice. So for the Coraline audiobook, he voices the whole thing, and he did the voices of those like two crazy old ladies, I think, that lived upstairs. And I was like, this is fantastic.
Yeah, it is really, really great. I mean, what did I? Oh, I listened to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Well, no, it was
Oh, cool.
Restaurant at the End of the Universe, voiced by Martin Freeman. And
Oh,
I think he voices all 5 of the books. And I read the first one in sort of book form, but I wanted to listen to the audiobook, and I saw that he did it, and I was like, oh, I absolutely have to have Martin Freeman read that to me. And he does such an the consistency because he changes his voice for every character, and
yeah.
it's just, he's very, very talented. And I'm gonna read the rest of that series all voiced by him if I can. So yeah, really, really great. I do recommend, if you are sort of interested in Norse mythology, and they are quite short reads, I do recommend Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard by Rick Riordan, because you can read it
Cool.
without having read any of the other series that he's written even. And they are middle grade fun books that they're very much for their audience. But I can literally, even now, I've been reading Rick Riordan since I was probably about 12, and even now I pre-order absolutely everything he writes, and I read it when it comes out. And I used to read it when it came out, when I had time. But I still read everything that he writes, and I enjoy it just as much as I did when I was 12. So
I missed the Percy Jackson boat when I was young, but I have watched the movies, and apparently that's a crime. So
no.
I like the first one. The first one's okay.
The thing is, I say that as someone, they were my introduction to the books as well. I watched the first Percy Jackson film, and I found it, I absolutely loved it. And then I read the books, and I kind of had that sort of realization that most people get when they read books based on, that have been adapted into films. They go, this is so much better. Why didn't they do this? And I found out it was a series, and I sort of read that as quickly as I could buy it with my pocket money. And it's really a lot better. Both of the films are fine, they're just not based off those books. They've just borrowed the characters. they are fine. The author is quite so Rick is quite he is not a big fan of the films. They kind of took all of his characters and changed his world, and he wasn't thinking that. Disney Plus are now adapting it into a series though. So
cool.
Yes, so we're all very excited for that. Got new hopes.
I think once you lose the faith of the original creators, just take a step back, maybe just stop. Because I found that last year they're doing a Netflix, I can't remember if it's live action or animated.
Yeah.
They're doing a Netflix Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah.
And the original creators were like, we don't endorse this. Is horrible. We've been to the meetings. We're just not going to be a part of this. And I'm like, that's bad.
It doesn't bode well, no.
Take a step back. No.
There is, so I knew the famous director directed, it was Chris Columbus that did Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. And Rick Riordan published an email he basically sent to the director and the producers of the film, because he'd read the script before it sort of got made into the film, and he voiced his concerns and very concisely sort of outlined all of his problems with the plot and just generally. So and I don't know, he had a vision and executed it, but the main issue with the film is that the books from Rick's point of view are very much written kind of like the Harry Potter books. I hate likening the two because they're not the same. But he starts the books as 12 years old and he ages throughout them, and the plot is very dependent on that. And he wasn't happy with the aging up and then everything else that came afterwards. But yeah, it's Percy Jackson's interesting because sorry, complete tangent, but I didn't.
That's cool.
Everyone at a lot of people my age kind of learned to love reading from reading the Harry Potter series. That was their sort of first series that they read, and I actually read Harry Potter after I read Percy Jackson, because Percy Jackson was my first like series that I just like fell in love with reading over. So the entire world has got like very special place for me, and I was really happy when Rick started branching out into other mythologies such as Norse mythology, because I'd love to just have his brain. He's got like such an immense all-encompassing knowledge of mythology and that sort of thing. He's just really, really interesting guy.
Yeah, no, it's awesome.
Excellent. Well, we've got a diverse range of books on the on your shelf so far. I say shelf. Would you install a bookshelf for carrying these 5 books?
You have to install a shelf. I believe that books are 90% for looking at because they're so pretty, and they're 10% for me because I often will just look at my shelves and be like, this is endorphins just from looking at them, really. It's just fantastic. So yeah. Shelf, absolutely.
Listeners, of course, can't see this, but I do have my bookshelves behind me in the call, and one of these bookshelves didn't exist before March 2020. It was purchased in the last 12 months to accommodate a slight increase. But I completely agree. I tend to. It's wrong to judge books by their covers, but if I do like a book, I will search and find the nicest, most attractive cover and edition of that book in order to add to the collection.
Yeah. If you don't mind tangenting one more time.
No, absolutely, go ahead.
I kind of hate bad redesigns of covers, because I noticed that there's a couple of series that have had this recently. Harry Potter had it recently.
Yeah.
And more recently, the Court of Thorns and Roses series.
Yes.
Has some recent redesigns, which I think the most recent book has followed that new design. And I'm like, this most recent book is going to look like bad next to my original printings. I'm like, why? Come on, just stop making it bad.
Yeah, I think if they're going to do a series, they should at least complete the entire series in the same format. Yeah. I have seen the Court of Thorns and Roses new one, and I suppose it always kind of irritates me, as if you've come to the series when it was all out in paperback, you have to wait a considerable amount of time before you can buy a copy that's going to match your paperbacks, because they only release it in hardback for however long.
Yeah, 100%.
And then they don't always match. Now, I completely agree. Harry Potter is the redesigns, so I don't dislike them. And from the perspective of, a child now, I think, that is maybe what they wanted to go for, I guess, with the new illustrations in the UK. But I will always I've got original covers that I read. And the art on that is very sort of meaningful for me personally. And also, I'm not ready to spend any more money on getting new copies of the series for many reasons. So
of course, yeah,
but I completely agree. Redesigns are I always don't like it when they do. So they do collector's editions of books, and maybe the collector's. I feel like if you're going to do a collector's edition or anniversary edition, it needs to be really, really good, and you need to commit to actually doing the entire series in that style. Otherwise, you end up with a huge mishmash. Because I'm a big fan of Cassandra Clare's books, and I'm still waiting for them to release the anniversary editions of a bunch of their books.
I could actually see your special editions there. I was like, oh, I know those. I like the sort of anniversary edition of City of Bones.
Yes.
I had to think of what the first one was.
Yeah, so I've got the City of Bones Anniversary Edition, and they've not released any of the other 6 books in an
Hopefully will
anniversary
come in
edition.
time.
One day, hopefully. I mean, they've done special rune editions of the newer series, which I suppose I appreciate because I do have them. Although
Yes.
I was very cross because I, due to a Twitter malfunction, and it's the only thing I blame it on, I missed out on the most recent one. So I'm gonna have to find someone who's willing to sell one to me for a reasonable price, because I've had a look on the internet and it is extortionate for a 16.99 retail price book. Charging someone is charging £300. It's ridiculous.
What?
I mean, honestly, if someone pays that, they deserve to lose that money. But it's insane the amount that they retail for. Well, the amount that they go for afterwards. But
Yeah, because they're normally basically the same price as the paperbacks.
exactly. And I mean,
Maybe it's $10 more.
and that's the thing. And Waterstones, like they produce so many copies of them that book is never actually
Yeah.
going to be worth that much money, because it's not even close to the definition of limited edition. They make thousands and thousands and thousands of them. But
Yes.
anyway, rant over. I'm
That's
assuming
okay.
I'm assuming the reason they've not released all of them is a company called Illumicrate recently released the full Infernal Devices trilogy in a special edition that matches the anniversary edition they did. So they released them as a set, which I managed to wrangle for my birthday this year, after much pleading to the husband. He's not a great reader himself, so he doesn't understand the need for multiple copies of the same book, but he humors me and indulges me when I make a real case for it.
Yes,
yeah,
it's important to have multiple copies when a cover is gorgeous. I will note
exactly. And there are some books that are for reading and some that are for looking at, and you have to have a reading copy and a looking at copy.
100%.
Exactly. Okay, so second. Right, we were so close. We've got
So close.
we've got one last book to join your list of for your mini shelf that can hold many plants and ornaments as well.
Ooh, plants. Succulents. So the final book, sticking with the YA thing that we've been talking about for all those rants and tangents.
See, it was planned.
It was planned.
It was completely part of the plan.
Planned, guys. Planned tangents. So I am a big fan of John Green. And the first book that I can remember being able to say this is a favorite book is Looking for Alaska.
Why that one of all of his books?
I think the book's ability to it's really hard to explain. Oh, that's a hard one. Hang on. Yes, okay. Ultimately, the book deals with things like grief and sort of just complicated relationships, complicated emotions. And by and large, when there's relationships in the book, it shows them in a realistically human way. Even the complicated, potentially adult scenes that's gotten the book banned in America in some schools and libraries isn't meant to be sort of inappropriate the way you'd find in other YA books. It's shown in a way where it's like it's real. It's shown to be awkward where awkward is necessary. It's shown to be like, yeah, these are real relationships and these are real people reacting to a real situation. And I think just that human element, that relatability, just really reached out to me. I think I found the book at the right time in my life, and it just really spoke to me in that way.
It's really interesting because John Green is he's very, very popular, I know. I mean, would you mind giving just for the benefit of anyone who's not read Looking for Alaska, just a little bit about what it's about?
Yeah. So basically, Miles goes to a boarding school, I believe. It's sort of small town vibes, and he meets a couple of new friends, one of whom is Alaska, who is a girl at the school, and they become friends, and he sort of has feelings for her, and then something happens in the middle of the book to complicate things and to, I guess, force these teenage characters into processing the world as basically like as if they were adults, basically. Because I think it's a really sort of intense adult situation that they are forced into, I think.
Yeah,
I'm intentionally burying the lead, even though it's an old book. I'm like, look, I know not all editions tell you what happens. I'm like, if someone is going to read it, I want to like just, here's the spoiler, you know.
I completely
like,
understand. I think,
yeah.
I mean, a lot of John Green's books seem to be buried in sort of very much the journey and the progress, as opposed to maybe the actual plot points of what happens. It's to do with sort of they're very character driven books. So I think it's really interesting because it's written about a lot, but when essentially children, are forced to actually become adults, it's always interesting because it's not something that should ever happen overnight. It's something that you really need to grow into. There are people who are, reportedly adults that still growing into it now. But I can't say I've ever read Looking for Alaska, and I think it might be because so my only brush with John Green was The Fault in Our Stars, because I got swept up in that hype. It was not necessarily a book for me, and I'm very bad at associating authors with the one book that I've read of them instead of anything else. I've been duly reprimanded by great lovers of other authors who but Looking for Alaska is one that is interesting. Have they, I mean, they've seemed to adapt all of John Green's books into film. Have they done Looking for Alaska? I know they've done Paper Towns.
Looking for Alaska got a miniseries. I don't know where you can find it.
I'll put on the to find list. I think I do. I may have a copy of it somewhere. Now, it's intriguing. Boarding school setting is always a bit of a thingy, because I remember when I was younger, I was really caught up with the idea of, wouldn't going to boarding school be really, really fun? I think I've grown out of that now. I recently had to visit a boarding school for completely unrelated reasons, for work reasons, and it's not what I imagined.
And the boarding school in question is, I feel like when people picture boarding school, they're like Hogwarts, like that's so.
That is exactly what I thought.
Yeah, it's like, it's so cool, and there's so many halls. Like the teachers will never find you. We can have shenanigans and hijinks. The setting, if you watch the show, the setting reminds me, or what springs to mind is at the start of the Parent Trap movie. They're in like a camp.
Yeah,
it's like that. It's like that, only as if the campers were like smoking and having alcohol and stuff like that. So yeah, it's great. I think it's more down to earth in that way as well.
Yeah.
I think Looking for Alaska is good as well, just to think about the element of forcing teenagers to be adults. I think you could look at other books, like books where teenagers are forced to be an adult. And I'm like, well, technically, I think like Katniss in Hunger Games, for example, is forced to be an adult because she's forced into an arena where she has to potentially kill people.
Not just an adult, scary adult.
Yeah. And I think I like Looking for Alaska because the situation they're in is somewhat relatable. Hopefully not relatable for everyone, because hopefully, but it is relatable and engaging enough that it can draw you in, and you can link it to. There's usually a memory that you can link it to, and be like, yes, this is helping. This is cool.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, I mean, a lot of YA novels center around, teenagers essentially being forced to do things sort of above, like beyond their years,
Mm,
usually. And I find it interesting to sort of differentiate between, I mean, with dystopias and that sort of thing, it's usually from a war perspective. So the
yeah,
analogy sort of goes more towards, someone being forced to go to war and at a very young age and fight for that sort of thing. But I find it interesting to sort of see the difference, especially I suppose the difference between fantasy and just contemporary novels.
mm,
What kind of qualifies as a sort of a real situation and what isn't? Because I mean, I still enjoy YA to this day, and I enjoyed it a lot when I was a young adult. And I remember, like, my relationship to those books is so different now because I said it before, but I, when I was the same age as the protagonists in there, I remember thinking, all of their actions were
mm.
completely reasonable, and really the quote unquote adults in their lives were the ones who were out of order, and they were misunderstood and all of that sort of thing. Really projecting my own, feelings onto the onto the
Yeah,
character. Um, but when you sort of get older, read it as more of an adult, and the closer you get to the adults in the book, the more you kind of see it from their perspective, and the more, like, the further away from 16 I get, the younger 16 seems to be to me than it was when I was 16. And I try to think back to when I was 16, and it just feels more distant. And it's just hard to think, because I read all sorts like now, and I have to kind of remind myself how old the protagonist is sometimes. Like, I mean, I recently didn't reread the Mortal Instruments, but I recently sort of skimmed over passages of it for something that I can't remember what, but I had to sort of pinch myself and remind myself that for a good portion of the first book, Clary's 15, and I because she turned 16 in the first book, and then I think it only happens, the first, like, the six books only happen over a year, so at the very most, at the end, they're maybe 17, at most 18, with the oldest characters. When I think of the
yeah,
content of what's actually going on, I'm like, this didn't seem strange to me when I was the same age as them. But now it's really it's just interesting to read them both from different perspectives. Part of me does kind of wish that I could reread YA novels with the same mindset I had them from
mm,
them before. But it's interesting how much of it focuses on that. But like you say, it's real problems versus sort of fantasy problems, because unless something, again, this doesn't feel as far-fetched as I really want it to, but realistically, Hunger Games is never going to happen. Sorry, I'm crossing my fingers.
it felt pretty close last year. Gotta be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm crossing my fingers, but like somebody's already said that they might be trying to go for a second term, so I don't really feel like it is that far-fetched.
Well, at
But
least they're esteemed.
yeah,
At least
yeah.
they're esteemed.
But yeah, but realistically, we would hope that that would never be a scenario anyone would find themselves in. But with
Yes.
I suppose contemporary YA, it's they're always a little bit more a little closer to home, and if you can imagine it happening to you, it kind of makes it a lot more real to you. Yeah, it's a really interesting mix of books you got there. Do you mind just recapping your list for the benefit of any listeners who are enjoying our tangents but want just a quick reminder?
Yeah, for those who just joined us. Yeah, so number one is The Martian by Andy Weir. Number two is God Country by Donny Cates and Jeff Shaw. Number three is Spider-Man Life Story by Chip Zdarsky and Mark Bagley. Number four is Looking for Alaska. Actually, that was number five, but we'll just
Switched
go
it
along
up.
with it. Yeah, number four is Looking for Alaska by John Green, and number five is Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman.
Excellent. And I mean, you mentioned that one of the books would be a possible location. Were we not and thinking about current events, where exactly were you thinking could be your remote location? I'm trying to figure it out.
Oh, cool. Mars.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It might actually happen soon. They've just landed, rovers and all sorts on Mars. They're trying to find life, and it goes straight over my head. I'm not well versed in that sort of thing, but it's interesting. I mean, is it Jeff Bezos who wants to colonize Mars, or is that Elon Musk, or is it both of them?
It sounds like more of an Elon situation.
It does. I can't remember where I heard it, but I recently either listened or watched something that said, isn't it strange that Elon Musk is so bizarre and out there that you forget his name's Elon Musk? Like his personality completely overtakes the initial shock. But yeah, okay. So really excellent list, but you did say you struggled. So does that mean there are any honorable mentions that you would like to raise?
I considered 2 that are part of a series. I actually did consider saying Hunger Games, like the first one, because I quite enjoyed that one. And the other one I considered was the first volume of Ultimate Spider-Man, but I figured I replaced that with Life Story because that fit more of the standalone mold that I think was more applicable. I actually struggled with this sort of series rule I gave myself, struggled to find a 5th. So I came up with Norse mythology quite soon before recording.
So would you say you're more of a, do you prefer generally books that are in series as opposed to standalones and that sort of thing, or?
Yeah, I'd say so, actually.
Excellent. I mean, Hunger Games is a really interesting one because I haven't read Hunger Games in a while. It was probably one of the first books that I read when I properly got into reading when I was younger. Another one that was probably quite led by the films being released at the time. Is there a particular reason why the first one stands out to you? It could just be that's the first one.
I think it's purely just the first one element. I mean, if we're picking favorites, I think just the second one, both book and movie. But yeah, the first, just because it's the first one, I think it's good.
That's so interesting because I remember when I read them, I didn't actually enjoy the second one as much as I did the first one and the third one. I can't remember why. I just remember it standing out as one that I didn't enjoy as much. But oddly, when the film did come out, my then boyfriend, current husband, that was actually one of our first dates, was going to see Catching Fire in cinema. And he maintains that apparently I spoiled something that was going to happen for it in the film. I don't think he's right. I'm pretty sure that I didn't spoil anything, but it clearly wasn't that big a deal. Clearly. But Ultimate Spider-Man, I know, is quite well stated. Is that your favorite sort of version series in Spider-Man, or why did that one stand out as a possible contender?
It's one of the first graphic novels that I ever read. The Ultimate Universe was designed to sort of bring new readers in, and it was successful, at least in my part. And yeah, I think it's just, it's a teenage Spider-Man in modern day that I read when I was a teenager in modern day, so it sort of just has that personal connection for me in that way. Yeah,
excellent. Sounds really good. I say I haven't done my list. I think I'm saving it for a landmark episode in the podcast. But yeah, I can imagine my mentions is going to be really, really long. I tend to favor series just because they I feel like you get so much more time with the characters and the world and that sort of thing. So I do quite like a long series. Excellent. So that is your 5 books that are going to sit on your shelf in the nicest editions that they come in.
Yeah.
In your lockdown apartment that
in this special world, they're all limited edition
Exactly.
books that I got for much less than £300.
Yeah, and there is only one copy of them, and you own them. So when we do eventually emerge from from the end of the world, you will have the only copies.
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay, so that is your list. Thank you so much. This has been a really, really fun discussion. Just to, I mean, for me, start my day with, put me in good stead to get lots of things done, maybe today, maybe. But yes, thank you so much for being on. And if any listeners, say, wanted to find more book recommendations from you or see what you're saying on the internet, where could they possibly find you?
So on Instagram, I'm at riverreads93. And on the internet in general, it's riverreads.me is the webpage.
Excellent. That's really great. Thank you again so much for being on. If any listeners who are maybe new to the podcast like what they hear, please subscribe on wherever you find. This will be our 5th episode, which means we will finally make it onto Spotify. So you can means
cool.
You can find us on Spotify. So follow us on your preferred podcast provider, and you can follow us on social media at Books to Last Pod at Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So yes, listeners, thank you so much for listening. River, thank you so much for joining me. It's been so much fun. And until next time, bye.
Bye.